or overrule. Yes, sir.
I'm ready to proceed, Your Honor.
You may.
Okay. Your Honor, my name is Ray Jeffrey, and Elliot Capuccio and Mark Wiegand and I represent this lady who's sitting right here. Her name is Monique Rathbun. She's sitting next to her husband, Mark Rathbun, who's also known as Marty Rathbun. This case is about the intentional, premeditated harassment carried out by the defendants against the plaintiff, Monique Rathbun. The lawsuit is just beginning, but the court, as you know, is already having to confront a couple of issues. Normally, the court doesn't have to get too involved until we get a little bit farther down the road. But there are a couple of issues that the court will be facing. One, should the temporary restraining order that is protecting Mrs. Rathbun, should that be extended into a temporary injunction? And two, are these defendants subject to jurisdiction here in Texas? We believe the unequivocal answer to both of these questions is yes. Mrs. Rathbun deserves continued injunctive protection against these defendants, and the defendants should be made to answer these charges here in Texas. The relevant evidence in the case will be serious, both as to the ordeal suffered by Mrs. Rathbun as well as the culpability of the defendants. Here's what the evidence will establish. For more than 3 years, the defendants have shattered the privacy and the tranquility of Mrs. Rathbun's life. She has endured a complete loss of privacy, nonstop surveillance, videoing, photographing, face-to-face actual confrontations, intimidation, insults, harassment of her family, her friends, her co-workers, humiliating, nasty pranks, if you want to call them that. I think they're actually worse, but I can't think of another word. And finally, an interference with hers and her husband's ability to make a living. All of this has gone on for more than 3 years. Well, at the end of last year, Mrs. Rathbun really reached the breaking point. The defendants had made her life unbearable at her own home down in the Texas coast. Before the harassment started, she and her husband had lived a happy waterfront lifestyle down in Ingleside on the Bay, near Corpus Christi. They had to give that up. At the end of last year, they moved up here to Comal County to a house in the Rimrock Ranch subdivision over just off of 1863 in Bulverde. The house seemed ideal. It was set back off of the road on some acreage. It was hidden by trees. They had good, solid neighbors on each side. In fact, the neighbor on one side is the landlord leasing them the house that they have leased. Behind them is dense, unoccupied. So they missed Ingleside on the Bay, but they appreciated what they had found up here in Comal County. They breathed a sigh of relief. They enjoyed the tranquility here. They were still followed sometimes. There were still private eyes or other agents of the defendants that they could see lurking around. But at least they felt secure in the privacy of their new home. That was until very recently when a stranger, a suspicious stranger, showed up on the property behind them. That was the defendant, Steve Sloat. He was calling himself Greg Sloat. He's a former Deputy U.S. Marshal. And he gave a story about leasing the property behind their house to put an RV on. The details of the story really kind of stunk to high heaven. The Rathbuns, after what they've been through for over 3 years, were pretty suspicious. Then, just maybe a month or so ago, they discovered on this wooded property behind them a high-tech, camouflaged, human surveillance camera. The camera was pointed directly at their home and at the driveway. They have a long caliche drive, you'll see, coming into their home. So not only would they be surveilled, but people who came to see them would be surveilled. The camera, as I said, is high-tech, set up to transmit images over the cellular system. It's a camera designed for law enforcement use, not something used by deer hunters or people interested in game management. When that happened, Your Honor, Mrs. Rathbun was absolutely distraught. It finally came crashing down on her. They could run, but they couldn't hide. So we're here today because as fearful as Mrs. Rathbun is of these defendants, she realizes that her only choice, the only option, is to stand and fight. That's why we sought the TRO, and that's why we're seeking a continuation of the injunctive protection into a temporary injunction. And I'll remind the court, we've got all these defendants and their forces here. All the court has ordered them to do is not harass her and follow her and surveil her. That's why we're here. So we brought a suit for injunctive relief to make this abuse stop, for actual damages to compensate her, and for punitive damages to deter them from doing this conduct in the future, and to set an example that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated here in Comal County, Texas. One point I would like to make to the court is this is not a religious case, even though it involves these corporations that are all part and parcel of this Church of Scientology, and you'll get to learn a little bit about that in the case. But it's not a religious case. Mrs. Rathbun has never, ever been a member of the Church of Scientology. We're not here about their theology or their beliefs. They can believe whatever they want to believe. That the court is not going to be called on to make any determinations about any of that kind of stuff. This case is about a powerful organization and its duty to behave lawfully in a civil society. It's also about the rights of a law-abiding Texas citizen to live in peace. I would be surprised if any of these lawyers got up and quibbled about that people have a right to be left in peace and that a corporation has an obligation to behave lawfully in a civil society. I don't anticipate that's what the battleground will be. I do expect them to fight like crazy to deny involvement in all of this bad behavior. I think that will be the battleground of this case. Who is behind this organized campaign of harassment of this nice lady? We will prove that one person is behind it. A man named David Miscavige, who is the self-proclaimed Pope of Scientology. Mr. Miscavige used, the evidence will show, the other defendants as co-conspirators to carry out his plan. I need to summarize what the evidence will be in this regard. What will be proved? To untangle any legal dispute that relates to these defendant corporations, can be bewildering, and I urge the court not to underestimate this. The evidence will show that corporate Scientology's confusing complexity is not accidental. It is deliberate, and they have spent vast amounts of time and treasure to construct it. They have designed the corporate structure and all of these legal formalities for one purpose: to shield Scientology and Scientologists from criminal and civil liability. Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, not speaking about the faith or anything like that, but speaking about the practicalities of the corporations, described their corporate legal structure quite proudly as quicksand. He also said, and I'll quote, "Every time they shoot at you on the right side of the horse, you're on the left side. And then they prove conclusively you're on the left side of the horse, and you prove conclusively that you're on the right side of the horse." They go mad after a while. This is what the basic legal structure is. Corporate Scientology is a wealthy enterprise with billions of dollars to protect. After a 30-year battle with corporate Scientology, even the IRS gave in and granted tax-exempt status as a church. Before that, the government's position was Scientology is a business. And regardless of one's feelings about whether or not corporate Scientology should be regarded or recognized as a church, and that's debated a lot today, it's safe to say that its non-religious side is unlike that of any church that any of us would be familiar with. It has a disciplined group on the corporate side of agents who are responsible for scorched earth litigation and dirty tricks operations. This group is called the Office of Special Affairs, or OSA. It spends millions of dollars annually with the goal of destroying or neutralizing perceived enemies, such as Ms. Rathbun.
Your Honor, could we approach? Yes, sir.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
There's one piece of historical evidence that is well documented in numerous books, histories of the church, etc., and that is absolutely critical to understanding the defendant's tangled web of corporate structures. And that is the fact that when the Office of Special Affairs was called the Guardian's Office, you'll hear about that in this case, it committed the single largest secret infiltration of the United States government in American history. Fortunately for American citizens and taxpayers, they were caught by the FBI. This was called Operation Snow White. Nearly a dozen Scientology agents went to federal prison. This is not any kind of a secret thing I'm letting the court in on. This is well documented. In fact, one of the Scientologists who went to federal prison was Mary Sue Hubbard, the wife of Scientology's founder. Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, narrowly avoided.
Your Honor, I'll object. What's the relevance of this?
I'm about to explain, Your Honor.
Injunction, with regard to alleged acts against Ms.
Yep.
Rathbun. Why are we going into things that are back in the 70s?
May I respond?
Well,
Your Honor.
I appreciate that. This is opening statement. So
Yes, Your Honor.
try to keep it to
I
the
simply recited some facts. They might be surprising or startling facts to people who are unfamiliar, but I've literally just repeated the facts that are out there in the world, which is that the Guardian's office was caught.
One at a time, please.
I think the real issue here is just this is an opening statement.
Yes, sir.
Jeffrey, if we can just kind of get to the, I'm understanding there's an alleged web and that the web is extensive.
Okay.
Both extent and history.
I'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, he's playing to the media. It's irrelevant to any of the injunctive elements that's before this court, and he's doing it purposefully. He's attempting to get in confidential information. Now he's getting.
I understand. I mean, he is zealously representing his client, as I trust you will as well. And I know that we're not in front of a jury. And
we are in front of the media, Judge, and that's the reason we're here. And he's doing it purposefully. It's not relevant. It is an opening statement, but it's supposed to be what the evidence will show. And when we get to the point where it's evidence, what we show, there's going to be a relevance objection, and it's not relevant.
Your Honor, I'm trying to tell the court what is the relevance, and he keeps jumping up and objecting.
well, I think it will probably help if we can, as best possible, avoid the argumentative type language in our opening statement. So,
Okay. Yes, Your Honor.
trying to give everybody their due. So.
Okay. The evidence will show, Your Honor, that after the Guardian's Office affair, a major project occurred in corporate Scientology, which was how do we keep doing the same activities that we did before, but protecting ourselves from further liabilities. And that's how you come up to today.
Judge,
They,
the only way he could know that is if he has attorney-client communication.
Your Honor, there are
only
numerous
way
books
he
you
could
can
know
read this
that.
in. It's out there.
Okay.
This is, Your Honor, this is well documented in the media, in history books.
It's our concern about the privilege issue. It's concern about the disqualification issue. We cannot address this without the motion to disqualify being heard. And you asked him to not go into confidential.
Well, I haven't
There
heard
is
it yet.
none.
I mean, I haven't heard anything more than generalities at the moment, so. At the moment, I'm over
I'm trying to move on, Your Honor. What the evidence will show in the case is that from the days of the old Guardian's office, they created a new structure called the Office of Special Affairs. Nothing secret about this, nothing I've learned of attorney-client privilege about this. The purpose of this change in the corporate structure was to shield from liabilities. And the court, this is directly germane to what the court is going to have to do in this case. Is this an effective shield or is it not? Is it a sham? In the testimony, we'll give details about all of this, Your Honor. Out of deference to the court, I'm skipping over a few things here. So let's get down to the issue that I talked about at the beginning, which is, what will the battleground in this case be? I have not heard Mr. Schreiber, when he stood up, say that they're going to admit the Church of Scientology International and the Religious Technology Center and David Miscavige that, yes, we did all this stuff to Mrs. Rathbun. They're not going to admit that. That is going to be our burden to prove that. The evidence will be that Mr. Miscavige, in spite of this elaborate corporate structure set up, he rules and runs all phases of the Scientology corporations with absolute authority. They take the position, and you'll hear about it, that he is merely the chairman of the board of the Religious Technology Center, which is not supposedly an operational wing of the various Scientology corporations. Supposedly, the Religious Technology Center is completely uninvolved in the management of the different Scientology entities. The evidence will be that in spite of this seemingly hands-off position of chairman of the board of this one entity, Mr. Miscavige runs anything and everything that he cares to run within the various corporations. And there is a key for Your Honor to understand how this works. And that is, there is a unifying organization that runs through all of the Scientology corporations. It is called the C organization. It's called the C, and that's S-E-A, not like a C corp that lawyers think of. C as in ocean. The C organization runs through all of these corporate entities. And it's called that because it was created by Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, while he was running Scientology from a fleet of ships in the Mediterranean. Also, Mr. Hubbard had a background in the Navy. So it's the Sea organization, as in the ocean. You'll also hear it referred to for short as the Sea Org. That's how they commonly refer to it. They tend to abbreviate organization into org. The evidence will be that the Sea organization operates with a military discipline and command structure. Members who serve in the Sea Org sign contracts to serve for 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion years. Every significant corporation in this network of Scientology, the managers and the executives and the directors are all members of this quasi-military organization called the Sea Org.
If I can interrupt, I mean, just for the purposes of maintaining the status quo of the PR, I mean, if we can...
Yes, sir. I'm concluding.
Thank you.
Because if the court will recall, our basic premise is that there's really one man who has been behind this harassment of Mrs. Miscavige. And that is because David Miscavige is Captain Miscavige. He is the commanding officer of the Sea Org, which actually runs every one of these corporations. He is the commander-in-chief, as L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, was before him. There have only been 2 commanders-in-chief in the history of this organization. His title is literally Captain Miscavige, and that is as in captain of the ship. We will show detailed evidence of how Captain Miscavige actually runs things, and that he in fact micromanages everything, and in particular, relevant to this case, he micromanages matters relating to perceived enemies of the church. We will show in evidence that in Captain Miscavige's eyes, there is no bigger enemy than Mrs. Rathbun's husband, Mark Rathbun. Mr. Rathbun was the second in command to Captain Miscavige until he fled Scientology's desert compound back in 2004. He came to Texas from Scientology and fled Scientology. He moved as far as he could from basically the 2 headquarters of the church in Clearwater, Florida, and in Los Angeles, California. After his service in Scientology, he met Monique Rathbun, the plaintiff in this case. They got married. They started a quiet life down on the Texas coast together. But at some point in their history, specifically 2009, he spoke out about abuses that he had seen in the church. And it was at that point that this harassment began that I referred to in the beginning of my opening statement. We will show, and I'm in conclusion, Your Honor, we will show that there is literally no one in any of Scientology's corporate structure that would have the authority or the courage to order an operation such as this operation that has gone on for the last 3 to 4 years, except for Captain Miscavige. The evidence will establish that Captain Miscavige ordered and supervised this operation against the Rathbuns. And finally, this operation violated Mrs. Rathbun's legal rights. Texas law provides her remedies for that. And under Texas law, Captain Miscavige and his co-conspirators should be enjoined from inflicting further harm on Mrs. Rathbun, and he and anyone else involved in this unlawful operation should be made to answer these charges not in Clearwater, Florida or Los Angeles, California, but Comal County, Texas. Thank you, Your Honor.